and thank you to all of the presenters. Some really interesting talks, and really, I think they complement each other really nicely. Actually, to have those different perspectives, and really good to have some on the ground kind of experience from Helen and Lorenzo about actually trying to do this in their own communities. If anyone has got a kind of burning question or thinking about a question, feel free to drop that in the chat bar, and you can also raise your hand and I'll try and come to you. But to kick us off, I thought I would ask our panel. A few of you have already spoken about the kind of different rationales that exist behind school streets around air pollution or inactivity and fostering more active mode of travel and congestion and road safety as well. All of these kind of related issues. And Asa particularly mentioned the complexity of that. I wonder if the panel might be able to tell us a bit more about how they see those different rationales fitting together, how they work when they're trying to, talk to others about them, how compelling different rationales are, and maybe whether some of them end up conflicting or competing. Having said that, I wouldn't just follow the speaking order. I'm going to do that. So maybe I'll go to Jenny first to offer her thoughts on that, if that's okay.
Hiya, yes, that's fine. Yeah, it's that's a challenging question to start with. I think the biggest challenge for us and me as a member of Living Streets, as a member of staff at Living Streets, is I think we would like to engage a lot more with academia, especially, and also with parents. Like you say, we've got this really nice mix of different presenters today, and I think sometimes we are constrained as still a relatively small charity operating in this busy space of engaging with schools. That we've been running WOW, for example, for gosh, quite a number of years, kind of like 20 years or so now, and it's largely not changed all that much. Taking that step back to look at what we're doing in the mix of everything else that is happening, and being able to sort of look objectively and think, is this the right thing? Is this the right thing for this school? Do they actually need something else? Is quite challenging. I guess where we attempt to do that is with our more intensive engagement with schools, and that does enable us to kind of do more bespoke activity, and the fact that we've now got Travel Tracker, which has given us data, I think we can potentially kind of use that tool much more broadly than just within WOW, as a behaviour change scheme, and look to how we can maybe use that to monitor the impact of different interventions and different activities a little bit more. I'm not sure if I went completely away from what you were asking there, but there we go. It's a start.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and like you say, you've got these different campaigns going on in parallel over many years as well. Asa, I don't know, I sort of picked it from something you said anyway, so maybe this is chiming with some of your thoughts anyway.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good question, and definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot is how do these kind of, I guess, 3 or 4 different elements sit together. And I think often, really, I think especially in London, the air quality element has become a really compelling narrative element for driving kind of shift towards active travel, and other arguments over sustainable travel kind of don't have the same resonance often. And I think people understand very intuitively the air quality element, in that they feel it, and it has increasingly become part of the public discourse. And there are so many great organizations that are fighting for air quality, and a lot of grassroots organizations that are working within communities specifically around air quality. And we've heard from one of those today, and I think that is probably something that's really driving, I think, a lot of the change right now. I would say this as an academic, there needs to be more research done on exactly what we're talking about with air quality in school streets, and which settings they can really change the air quality in. As I know that not everyone is willing to kind of go on the record and say that school streets will lead to better air quality. But I'm sure that to some degree, the kind of direct emissions from tailpipes will be obviously reduced by having fewer cars there. So I think there will be some effect. But so in terms of the different rationales, I think really air quality is kind of driving ahead as the kind of one that is kind of really intuitively kind of bringing a kind of an emotional element that's needed to kind of make the argument for these kind of active travel interventions. I think the rest kind of follows logically, but yeah, they do always sit in a sort of uneasy things, and I think often it's the risk is that it's seen as I guess opportunist or to say, oh well, we're just fixing a traffic regulation issue here, so we're going to kind of put this in, but really it's actually about the big climate lobby. I don't know, but I think yeah, that there's opportunities with having kind of these multiple rationales, because it means you can tailor them to the specific problems of an area, and that's kind of the rationale speaks to all the benefits that come with a thing like this. But also I think yeah, we're seeing increasingly, I think, air quality being the one that's kind of really driving a lot of this at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, and I wonder if Helen and Lorenza, does that chime with your experience when you've been communicating some of this?
Yeah, definitely. If we think about the parents that are involved with what we're trying to do locally, it's very much air pollution that is their primary concern, and also probably quite a bit of road safety. So a lot of our schools have got big issues with pavement parking and pavement driving, and idling engines. So I think air quality will be probably the main motivator, but also trying to improve the safety outside schools. We haven't actually had that much, I think, because we haven't actually done any school streets yet, so we haven't actually had any pushback from any parents. But some of the head teachers have been a little bit cautious around it, and I think that they're potentially are anticipating some conflict possibly arriving from people who do still want to be able to drive right up to the school entrance. So I think it is going to be interesting, the next phase of what we're doing, because we are going to really try and push to get these trials put in place. But I think Lorenza's point earlier about that some people would think that being in a car protects your child from pollution, and of course it doesn't at all. So I think if we can just raise awareness around that, and actually the best solution for everyone is to keep our school streets free from pollution and cars, then I think that's the way we need to go, really.
I think if I can add as well to that, one thing that we found quite strikingly more recently with the pandemic as well is because more people have reverted to their cars. Public transport is obviously one thing that we know we are not really meant to use unless we really have to. So there's actually been, we feel, an increase of traffic, and the safety has actually got a lot worse. And there's been a lot more people that have had very close calls, with accidents outside schools. So actually, when talking to the parents, but also local residents, there's a lot more understanding that it's just not safe. And it's not fair that if you're walking or cycling or scooting to school, as a family, you are put in more danger because you choose to do it that way compared to others. So I think that's been a really interesting kind of thing, switch. And I think some people have mentioned here, obviously you probably know about the Levenshulme, Burnage, low traffic neighbourhood issues and debates that are going on. But really interestingly, even the group that is quite worried about the consequences of the LTN, and they are challenging it, are in agreement that school streets are a good idea. So as parents, we're actually quite keen to try and establish some common ground across all residents and parents to say there's many things that are complex and there are many debates going on, but the safety of our children, clean air and just physical safety is paramount. And that seems to actually be getting more positive responses from people that are actually quite vocal on their worries to say the least, about the LTNs. So that seems to be an important thing for us that we want to build on.
Thank you. That's really actually kind of connects to one of the other questions that's been raised in the chat, and that I wanted to ask about. And it overlaps not just with school streets, but with other interventions like LTNs or active neighbourhoods. And that's the question of kind of shifting. Is it, do you solve a problem on one street and shift into other places? And I thought it might be interesting to hear from the panel, not simply about the sort of very direct examples or evidence for and against whether shifting is even happening between, one road and nearby roads, but also maybe a wider question about those schools for which it isn't feasible because maybe they're located on or close to major roads, and then an equity kind of question about the schools and communities for whom this might not be an option, and whether we're thinking about who is being, not purposefully sort of left behind in this sense, but if there are communities that might not be able to implement these sorts of solutions, and how we kind of tackle that or deal with that in pursuing school streets. Does anyone want to kick us off? It's not exactly a light question, is it? But yeah.
I can say that there is a piece of research being done by Sustrans at the moment on looking at the question of displacement in Birmingham around school streets, and to kind of do a kind of very control school and sort of it should be a very robust analysis of displacement with school streets. So we probably will have actually a good answer to that. Technically, the question of equity and LTNs is a really difficult one, and it is a massive debate. I think with schools, I think there are really good justifications for transforming kind of the streets outside of schools and to I guess make sure that those roads are treated with an importance, because they're the roads that the children are using to get to school. And I think there is a strong justification for, in almost all cases, trying to do as much as physically possible to remove traffic in there. I think there does need to be a change in how we think about the physical space that surrounds our schools. And I think with thinking about schools that are on busy roads, and potentially ones that are seeing increases in traffic as more and more people drive in this current moment, I think it is important to say that the evidence for traffic displacement due to low traffic neighborhoods is like pretty much evidence around any kind of traffic related thing right now is really patchy, because there's just no baseline information. All of this stuff has been implemented with no baseline data collection. So we just don't know what's causing a lot of the traffic in many cases. But it's also worth saying that I think figuring out how to kind of, I guess, whole systems approaches and not getting too bogged down in the street itself, the school street as an intervention, is important to make sure that schools that are on A roads have like really strong crossings and have really safe environments around there. Even if we can't close the traffic, there are lots of other things that can be done to make those safe pedestrian environments, and those should be focused on as well.
Yeah, just to kind of follow on from that, I think as I was kind of touching on in my presentation, and as you just said, it's not seeing the school street as this is a panacea, or the low traffic neighbourhood as this is going to solve everything, because if you just look at that small area on its own, it's what about the area next door, what about the area over here, and so I think when you're looking at schools, it's that range of different interventions, and it's thinking, looking at the the physical environment in which the school sits, but also the nature of the community and the nature of the school and the school culture as well. There's been some really nice research actually, I think, in New Zealand, kind of looking at how all those different elements relate, kind of policy and culture and community alongside the physical environment. And then thinking, right, what from this range of different tools have we got? And again, I guess we come back to the challenge of there's not always that really clear evidence about the different impacts of the different things in different places. But I guess at Living Streets as well, what we're trying to do ultimately is to look at all journeys and convert those journeys to sustainable modes. So ultimately, it's a shame it's probably not going to happen tomorrow, but we're trying to take the cars off that busy road as well, and enable people to choose cycling, walking, public transport for all of their journeys. So yeah, we've still got the equity issue right now, and particularly at the moment, if it does seem like we are seeing increases in private car use. But yeah, it's kind of looking at that whole picture and trying to make that shift kind of at a cultural, at a national level as well.
Yeah, and seeing it as part of, as Asa says, a whole system, and not treating it as a kind of short-term panacea. Helen and Lorenzo, I don't know if you've...
Yeah, I don't want to repeat anything that's been said. I absolutely agree with it. It's a whole system approach needed. But just as an example, just to show that it really is inequality in air pollution. Where we are in the A6, all the way up into Manchester, we go Levenshulme Longside, Ardwick. We've got fairly low, particularly the nearer into the city centre you get, car ownership. I think in Ardwick it's the last census data was 37% of households own a car, yet they've got a huge amount of traffic coming through their community. And there's two schools, there's a high school and a primary school right on the A6, and it's heartbreaking to think, all this traffic that goes past and all the fumes there. So we're really keen to actually connect communities along the A6 and campaign around that. And school streets won't be a solution there, but we want to see a clean air zone that includes private vehicles, and we want to see a segregated cycle lane on the A6. So we've been campaigning for that as well. So yeah, you need a whole suite of solutions. I see Lorenzo nodding may want to add something.
Oh no, that's spot on. Yeah, I mean, when you have over half the population that don't own a car and don't have the means to buy a car, because there is a lot of strange discussions going on, even sometimes coming from the council, that it's about, well, needs must, it's a pandemic, so you can't use a public transport, and therefore this is perhaps what you need to do. It is not an option, for many people that's not an option. This is why we are campaigning completely, 360 degrees. The other thing that we really want to really get a better understanding is diversity. We do, obviously, I think some people said it in the chat, preachers to the converted. We are very aware that obviously those of us who've been involved also many other activities, climate change and lots of other things. But it's actually really understanding how you can open up the conversations on people that might have worries and think differently, people that might have cultural differences for which they feel safer in cars, which is very valid. I think we take a lot of stuff for granted. We have privileges that we don't realize we have. So accessibility is another really big, important aspect we want to really understand. So I think that's something that we're very keen, that, as I said, is structural and system changes, because it has to happen 360 degrees. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then, like you say, understanding, I mean, even just, there's so many moving parts in this. That's not a sort of active travel pun, but understanding how all of this comes together is really complicated. One of the things I wanted to pick up from the chat that a few people have raised, and you mentioned it at the end of this, about maybe as a preaching to the converted, maybe we can try and pull out some ideas or even tips about how groups might go about enacting these sorts of changes. So I noticed that Alison was asking about engaging with head teachers, and I think Tom asked about counsellors. I wonder about the different people you go to, the different routes, and sort of steps for how communities might go about starting this conversation, maybe specifically about school streets, but as you in Levenshulme, you're already connecting to Burnage, to the A6, to wider active travel issues. So maybe we could try and be a bit practical for a moment and think about how other communities or other people might be listening. I think we even have some counsellors in our audience, so maybe we can get practical for a moment and think about how people achieve these sorts of changes. Anyone who feels like they've got any initial thoughts? Maybe I'll plump to ask Jenny to kick us off as a professional active travel campaigner.
Yeah, I was sorry. The reason I didn't chip in is I was just about to put a link in the chat. We've got a couple of nice guides that it was actually our London Living Streets campaign group put together with London Cycling Campaign a few years ago now, around kind of aimed at counsellors. One of the guides is aimed at counsellors, so kind of an introduction for them about what a low traffic neighbourhood is and what the benefits can be for them and for their constituents. And I guess with schools, it is the challenge is kind of making sure that you get that head teacher buy-in, really. And I think often when we're approaching schools in terms of offering them support through our programmes, we will kind of do our research on that school. We'll be looking on the website and perhaps looking at what that school have been up to recently to try and tap in to what their particular sort of priorities and values are. I guess just from my kind of years of working at Living Streets, one of the great things about promoting walking is that there's pretty much an argument that will tap into everything, whether it be clean air, whether it be the health of the physical health of pupils, whether it be attainment and attention in class. You can pretty much make a case for promoting walking according to any kind of value or priority that a school might have. I guess a big challenge right now is, even more so than ever before, those head teachers and school staff more broadly are so busy just reacting to the restrictions and what they're having to go through. So we are finding that a challenge, even with established school relationships. So I think perhaps now more than ever, if there are local campaigners and parents who want to who are able to push this agenda and also support it in the way that we're seeing with the wonderful work in Levenshulme and Burnage, then that's absolutely amazing, because the schools are just really limited. But I suppose the other thing is, some of the points that Lorenza was making around why this kind of work and why school streets and promoting active travel is important now more than ever as well. If we want to enable people to socially distance on their journeys to school, if we can close off that street and make the space for people to travel safely, then that's going to be a real benefit for the school. So it's kind of finding out what those things are right now that the school will see as helpful.
Brilliant. That's really helpful and I think that was one of the points made in the chat as well, about how stretched schools can be as well. I've noticed that I've got a hand up, so before I go to some of my other panelists, perhaps I'll actually try and see if Luke might be able to enable Derek Antrobus to turn on his mic.
I've done that.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I think somebody mentioned there were counsellors in the audience, and I felt guilty as the counsel, the only counsellor's name that I recognise in the audience, or maybe others. So I thought I ought to come in there, and partly I'm surprised that you know, my experience in Salford is that if there are a group of people who want to establish a play street or a school street, we try to experiment with those in Salford, then the elected members are really keen on this, will champion it. It's connecting with the right members. And one of the things that I think is really important is to remember that the councillors aren't some alien beings who've been parachuted in from somewhere beyond the places where you live. We actually live in our cities. We actually travel the streets. You know, we cycle up and down. We know what the issues are. And if we've got a group of willing residents and we've got officers who are enthusiastic and imaginative, and we can resolve these things together. And I think it's about just identifying the enthusiasts to come together, and you can achieve anything. I've seen that in Salford. You know, it's been great that we've got some fantastic officers, and sometimes you know, I'm supposed to be the lead member for planning, and I'm supposed to be championing all these things, but most of the time I'm sort of being dragged along by officers. I go into them saying, "Look, we've got to do this," and they've already done it. So it's great if you've got that sense of togetherness and not thinking, oh, they must be against us because they're bureaucracy, or they must be against because they're in positions of power. I think it's recognising that we should all be working together to improve our communities. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't mean to put you under pressure, but I'm grateful to you for the contribution. And perhaps we've got early signs that Salford is becoming Greater Manchester's Hackney. I don't know. Helen and Lorenzo, did you want to add anything on that experience that you've had as you begin this kind of journey?
Well, I think something similar to what we said before, and probably Helen has other views and to add as well. And I responded to Helen here on the chat, which was really interesting, is that actually in terms of volunteers and people really wanting to get going and make this happen, even though we talked about we want to obviously ensure that we have diversity and we talk beyond, you know, those already on board, there is a swell in movement, you know, and wanting to really see a better environment for our children. It was really interesting to hear from Derek, so thank you very much for your input there. Is actually we're finding, if I have to be completely honest, very frustrating and demoralizing, where, you know, Helen was saying, you know, a letter of 30 parents sent to the executive members in August and not yet replied. Finding out, which is wonderful, other schools across other areas of Manchester did manage to do a school street on the 8th of October. You know, we talked about it weeks in advance and we kind of didn't know even where to begin because we couldn't find the information. So things like that are very frustrating, and it feels that our concerns, especially in a pandemic, which we all understand is complex and terrific, you know, tragic for everyone, but it feels like there are other issues here happening, and therefore school streets are not a priority. It's a nice to have. And actually, we are trying to say, well, it isn't a nice to have because, you know, we have the air quality and the social distancing. So I think it's difficult for me, I don't know if Helen is more positive, for me to say action that we can do. I think we know what actions we can do. It's now understanding how, you know, we can actually get them implemented. And without being given the tools of the, you know, temporary stop orders or anything like that, that can, or widening the pavements, I think somebody mentioned, which would be fantastic if we could actually just take a little bit of road space out of cars and giving them to pavement. And there's lots of things, but again, it's the communication with council that for us at the moment is proving incredibly tricky. So yeah. Helen, I don't know if you...
Yeah, and just in terms of communicating with the head teachers, we've just done a little summary actually of our activity around Clean Air Day, and a thank you to them for supporting, you know, getting the messages out to parents and carers to try and walk on that day. And we're going to do the weekly walking buses, just to try and demonstrate, you know, what can happen and through by demonstrating it, you know, hopefully keep making the case for it and keep the momentum going. So we're trying to be positive and trying to show the head teachers that we're proactive and, you know, we want to support them.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I think that was a really nice place, if not always as optimistic or positive as we like. It's nice to end with a kind of practical thought. I'll just thank our speakers again. So yeah, thanks to Jenny and Asa and Helen and Lorenza. There's lots of links in the chat to some of the active consultations that are going on, and various different articles and resources that are useful. So please do make use of those. We'll make those available also via our website when we write a seminar report after this. Just to add my own kind of obsession at the moment related to the highway code consultation that Jenny mentioned, that encourage, yeah, hopefully Luke also has another link in there about some running campaign about encouraging different ways of talking about pedestrians to be included within the highway code. So lots of work for us all to do in terms of fostering school streets, but also part of this bigger whole system about fostering active travel. So yeah, thank you to all our speakers and to our audience. I should also remind everybody we have our next seminar, which is about the role of cargo bikes. I can share the Eventbrite there. So please do sign up to our next seminar. That's coming up, it says, struggling for the date, on the 3rd of December. So that'll be a nice Christmas treat for everyone to talk about cargo bikes. And I don't know if Harry has anything she wanted to add before we go.
No, just thank you everyone for coming. That was some great presentations there.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, thanks again for everyone joining us. Yeah, look out for the next Healthy Active Cities seminar. And thanks again to our speakers.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Cheers.